Hello, and welcome to this virtual tour of the city of Elkhart. My name is Patrick McGuire. I'm the Curator of Education with the Elkhart County Historical Museum. And in this virtual tour, we will be showing you sites in the current city of Elkhart, giving you historical context with their current location, what buildings may have been in certain locations, what buildings are still in certain locations, and showing you some historic photographs from the historic collection of the Elkhart County Historical Museum to help flesh out those stories. But before we actually begin with the tour, I wanted to just first provide you with some background information on the history of Elkhart. So, the history of Elkhart actually begins with this native word here. It's written in the language of the Miami people, uh, what is better known as Miamia, and it's pronounced Misha Tahawenke. Now, in the slide here, you can see two different stories. First, on the left is the story that has been told for decades about how the city of Elkhart got its name. And that story reveals a story about a theory that the native people thought that what is today Island Park in downtown city of Elkhart is shaped like the heart of an elk. Now, that story has gotten into the collective memory of the people of our community, but unfortunately, that story is false. The actual story about how Elkhart got its name comes with the story of Misha Tahawenke. And I think it's actually a much more vital, much more dynamic story. And it all begins and traces its roots back to the formation of who people of Miami Native American heritage are. So, some background information: the Miami people traversed south on Lake Michigan. According to their own histories, they traversed south down to Lake Michigan, navigated what is today the St. Joseph River, and formed a village and formed their own culture, which means at this point they broke away from a larger group. They formed their own traditions, their own language, their own customs, and many other things that make a society its own. And established a village, what is today South Bend, Indiana, which is just west of Elkhart. And as the community in that village got bigger and bigger, a contingent broke off, traversed and navigated St. Joseph River and moved east to the confluence of the St. Joseph and what is known today as the Elkhart River, today where the city of Elkhart is. And when they got to this village, there was a woman who took the heart of an elk after it had been hunted and killed and hung it upon a tree. Uh, whether this was a religious or spiritual significance or a sign for example, good luck, we are not sure. But we do know that the woman who hung the heart on an elk, she hung it on a tree, and at some point, another woman came around and stole this heart. And the woman who initially put the heart of the elk on the tree was so despondent and so emotional and so heartbroken that that story became connected to this area and to this region. And that story had been passed through generation and generation and generation of Miami people. And it is the reason why the community of Elkhart got its name, not because of uh, Island Park that is shaped like an elk. This is the story that the Miami have passed down from generation. This is a story that we here at our museum, the Elkhart County Historical Museum, interpret as the true reason why. Now, this area was known as a crossroads where many native people and European travelers and traders would traverse. Trading was done here in a number of different times. And as we get into American history and as the United States is formed and begins to move west, there is one important person that helps spread the importance of this area. And that is this man. His name is Isaac McCoy. He is a Methodist minister, and he was looking for a location to set up a mission where his hopes were to spread Christianity amongst the native populations here. So his first thought was actually what is today Elkhart. But at the time, when he was looking for a place to set up his mission, this area was still part of Native territory. It still belonged to Native Americans. Now, so he moved further north and set up a mission in Michigan. But Isaac McCoy would come out and traverse and explore this area and go back to his home base of Fort Wayne, where he would write notes and he would report what the area looked like. And he always talked about the rich farmland and the water and all the supplies that you would need to set up an area for American migration. The local creek in the city of Elkhart, known as Christiana Creek, is actually named after Isaac McCoy's wife. But it wouldn't be until 1821 where the Native American groups in this area, including the Miami and Potawatomi, which are still here today, and numerous other Native groups, negotiated with the United States government and and agreed to the Treaty of Chicago in 1821, which opens up the land for American migration. So that was in 1821, but it wouldn't be for another 7 years until a community is formed. And that community is known as Pulaski. In 1828, a few Americans moved here and settled what is on the north side of the St. Joseph River, which is today the city of Elkhart. As the city of Elkhart has gotten bigger, the village of what was Pulaski, or the settlement of Pulaski, has been engulfed by the city of Elkhart today. So the people who set up the the settlement of Pulaski went about the work of developing the area. They established a trading post, they built mills, and as well as had a post office. They named the area Pulaski after a famous Revolutionary War general. And they were basically squatters because they were setting up on land that they did not own. They didn't purchase it from the United States government. So there was a real danger for them because at any moment someone could come in and buy and purchase the land that they had developed. But they were protected when the city of Elkhart gets established by Havilah Beardsley, who we'll talk about next. It wasn't until 1839 that the post office at Pulaski, which was set up, was renamed Elkhart. Today there is a park along what is Beardsley Avenue in the city of Elkhart, known as Pulaski Park, which is roughly where that settlement was. Now, the person who is known as the founder, or the father, I guess, for lack of a better term, of the city of Elkhart is Dr. Havilah Beardsley. He arrives in this area in 1831. He purchases the land from Pierre Moran, who was a Native American who was given this land in the Treaty of Chicago. He purchases the land for $1,500 and does what the normal protocol was for setting up a property. He lays out the village. He gets it surveyed. He sets up plats, which you can see here in this slide. Here is Havilah Beardsley original drawing of the plat of the city of Elkhart. So you can see the lots there, and he begins selling the lots and developing a town. And that town has grown ever since. So since 1831 till today, this area has grown and bigger, and it's progressed. And there are a number of different sites that connect to the history of Elkhart over that time, which we're going to talk about today. So I've structured this tour by looking at and selecting 12 different sites around Elkhart. As you can see here in this overhead map, I've marked all 12 of them. And we're just going to go from stop 1 to stop 2, so on and so forth, and work our way through the city of Elkhart. Each of these sites are historically significant to the community for a number of different reasons. And whether it was through industry or a particular person or the efforts of the town to show how it's progressed over time, or faith communities or other communities, we're going to be taking a look at all 12 of these. And let's just go ahead and get started with stop number 1, which is today the Elkhart Civic Plaza, the heart of downtown Elkhart. As you can see here, it's complemented by picnic benches, a clock tower, and really it's the home of downtown Elkhart, whether it's events like the Jazz Festival or giant sculptures. Um, this is really the heart of the city. Now, at one time, this city block was home to the J.F. Funk and Brother English German printing office, bookbindery, and bookstore. They later shortened their name to the Mennonite Publishing Company, and that company was run by John Funk. John Funk was a member of the Old Order Mennonite faith community, and out of this office and out of his publishing company, he produced a number of different books, pamphlets, and periodicals. But most notably, Funk produced the newspaper, The Herald of Truth. This paper, which was targeted towards people of the Mennonite faith, had articles on the faith, letters from Mennonites across the country, and had lessons for children, amongst other things. This paper reached a nationwide readership, and that is the only paper in the history of Elkhart County to do so. Because of this and the popularity of his newspaper, Funk became an influential member of the Mennonite faith community and was able to help establish Elkhart as the headquarters of the Old Mennonite Church, a branch of the Anabaptist faith. Not only did he run his publishing company here and help establish the Prairie Street Mennonite Church, which is still vital and working in Elkhart today, he also helped establish Goshen College in the nearby town of Goshen, which is Elkhart County seat, and established the Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary, which Goshen College and the Biblical Seminary are still running today, and really shows the deep historical ties to Elkhart County and the Mennonite faith community, which is still a very much growing and vital part of the society of Elkhart County and particularly Elkhart today. So what is today the heartbeat of Elkhart's public life and with the Civic Plaza was once home to a publishing company that had a nationwide readership, the only newspaper to do so. So as we move from Civic Plaza just to the east down Franklin Street, we come to a building that is now occupied by a bank. It is the current home of the bank, but in 1895, when the building was built, its original intent was to be the home of the police and fire departments. There has been very little done to the front of the building if you compare the modern view of the building to its historic picture. The facade of the building hasn't really changed. The tower at the top and the roof has been altered slightly, but you can see that the windows and the brick is still the same. Now, when this building was built in 1895, as I said before, it was home to the police and fire departments. The police and fire departments were removed from the original city hall, which we'll talk about later in this program, due to the vibrations from the fire bell causing damage to the original city hall. Later on, this building also was home to City Hall, so it is the second City Hall as well. It was City Hall until 1916, when the current municipal building is built. Now, another thing I want to point out, not related to this building, but across the street, is a park. It is right behind where Civic Plaza is. That park has been used for a number of different things, but during World War II, just imagine a park filled with metal scrap, because for the city of Elkhart and its surrounding areas, during World War II, it became the salvage depot where people would bring scrap metal they could find and drop it off there. And every so often it would be collected and then given to factories to be made in a number of different things for the war effort. So with the Civic Plaza, with this building, which was the fire and police departments and later City Hall, and then the salvage depot across the street in the park, right in the center of downtown, there's a lot of history. But as we work our way out from the center of downtown, there's a lot more history that we have left to uncover. Now, moving just north of the Civic Plaza, we come to the Waterworks building, designed in 1910. Now, this building we've included on this tour because of who designed it. and that's the architect Ehil Turnock, whose name you will hear a lot through the rest of this program. Um, the Waterworks building, as I said, was built in 1910. Here is the historic photo, and as you can see, it hasn't really changed over that time, which is so it's a great example of the work of Ehil Turnock, and more importantly, the signature style he had for public buildings. As you can see, it has red and brown brick, limestone accents, a tile roof for the Waterworks building. It's a red tile roof, but Turnock also used green as well. It has arched windows and horizontal orientation. So you can see that that has been used. That's Turnock's signature style. And to compare it to another building that's not far away, just down Lexington Avenue, is the YWCA building shown here. And you can see the two right next to each other to be able to compare them. Now, Turnock designed many of the prominent buildings in the city of Elkhart. As I said, you'll hear his name over and over again as we go through this tour. But I just wanted to provide an example of a signature style and show that even down the street from this building, the Waterworks building, there is another building that shows Turnock's designs. But as I said, we'll see buildings designed by him over and over again as we keep going through this tour. But this is a really great example of the design of Ehil Turnock. So as we keep moving up Main Street, it brings us to the southeast corner of Main and Jackson, which is currently the location of a bank. But at one time, this was home to one of the premier destinations in the city of Elkhart, and really the Elkhart County. And what I'm referring to is the hotel that was once here. So the hotel first opened up in 1863, and it was known as the Clifton Hotel. Immediately, it became one of the premier places to stay in the county. People from far and wide, as they were traveling east, as they were traveling west, north and south, would stay in the Clifton Hotel. So it immediately became popular. It even became more popular and more well known and certainly more luxurious in 1889 when the hotel was bought by Herbert Buckland. Herbert Buckland was a prominent Elkhart citizen who made his money through the patenting of medicine and then later through real estate. So he bought the hotel, renamed it the Buckland Hotel, and was the anchor for the northern part of downtown Elkhart. Later on, we're going to be talking about the Buckland Opera House, which was on South Main Street. So he had the two main anchor points of downtown Elkhart, the southern part of the Buckland Opera House and here in the northern part with his hotel. So when Herbert Buckland purchased the hotel, he renovated it and added things like indoor bathrooms, both private and public. He installed elevators and redesigned the dining room, which was to be the showpiece for the hotel. And think about adding things like indoor bathrooms and elevators in the 1880s. That was seen as extremely luxurious and probably very expensive for Buckland to install. But it continued to be a premier hotel in Elkhart. It was the most luxurious place to stay for miles around, and it stayed that way for a number of decades until 1958, where then there was a fire inside the Hotel Buckland, which caused major damage. The hotel was remodeled and reopened in 1960, where it changed its name back to its original Clifton House Hotel name. The hotel continued on for another 9 years until 1969, when another fire resulted in the closing of the building. And then later in 1973, the building was torn down and the lot was turned into businesses, where a number of businesses have been there, and currently there is a bank. So for our next stop in this program, we are headed northeast to the part of the program which is the farthest away from downtown Elkhart. And on its surface, as you can see, that this building looks kind of run down, but what it is hiding is this was once home to the largest band instrument factory in the world. So what this building used to be in its grandeur and in its heyday is this building right here. So you can see the historic photo. This was home to the C.G. Kahn Band Instrument Factory. Now this particular building was actually the third factory. There were two previous to it that were both destroyed by fire. and they were not in this particular location. But so there was an original factory built uh, in the late 1870s. It was destroyed by fire in 1883. The second building that would replace it was destroyed again by fire in 1910. And this building was built in 1910, shortly after the fire that destroyed the other building. Now, this building was destroyed, or not destroyed, excuse me. This building was designed by E. Hill Turnock, who we mentioned earlier and will continue to mention throughout this. Uh, and it was designed in the Spanish mission style, as you can see here from this building. It's got a tiled roof, just like his signature style. And not only did he design the front building, which you can see in this photo, held the offices. It also, as you can see here, as we show this illustration of the entire factory, it was built and designed so that raw material would go in one end of the building, and by the time it went around to the other, it was a finished product. The amazing thing is that this building, the largest band instrument factory in the world, was only built in 3 months' time. Today, that would be almost nearly impossible to do. But from this building, as you can see from the facility, there were offices, and I can show you some pictures of offices here. We have C.G. Khan there in the top left corner in his private office, to the number of various departments, from saxophones to trombones to brass to engraving, which is what C.G. Khan musical instruments were really known for, and even to the cases of being built for these particular instruments. Everything in this facility was done under one roof and done in-house. Now, this building continued to be the C.G. Khan factory for a number of years, even into the 1960s and 70s. But once C.G. Khan was the factory, or the business, the company was bought by a larger stakeholder, this building ceased to be used as the band instrument factory in the 1970s, and then the factory was torn down between the 1970s and 1980s. The only building that remains is the building that's still standing today, which was home to the offices, the main offices, and is actually just a current shell of itself. Currently, the building is vacant, and only a few months ago, the property was bought by the Elkhart Redevelopment Commission and is seeking public feedback about what to do. Ideas range from everything to housing to office space, and even a petting zoo were ideas for this building. So time will tell what will happen to the former home of the C.G. Khan band instrument factory. So as we continue our historic tour here, we move back to downtown Elkhart at 1868 Jackson Boulevard, which, if you're looking at the building compared to its historical image here, not much has changed. The windows are the same shape and the top and the bottom floor. The roof line has changed a little bit. For the most part, this building has stayed the same. Now, what's historically important about this building is there's actually two reasons. First, the bottom floor of the building, or the ground floor, was used as a post office, and it was Elkhart's very first building dedicated solely to being a post office. Prior to this, the post office was in another business or even in someone's home. So this was a building built for the post office, and that was on the bottom floor. The top floor during the 1870s was used as a newspaper office. And this was the home of the Elkhart Observer. Now, what makes the Elkhart Observer historically significant is who the editors were. So the editors were Edward and his wife, Emma Malloy. Emma Malloy was the first female newspaper editor in northern Indiana. Now, the Elkhart Observer is a very pivotal moment in Emma Malloy's life, because when she's done printing the newspaper only after a few short years, she has gone from a newspaper editor all the way to a statewide and starting to become a nationally known speaker. And it all happens in these few short years that she's editing and writing for and reporting for the Elkhart Observer. So what made that change? What catapulted her to notoriety? And it's what was going on here. in Elkhart coupled with her past. So during this time, while Emma Malloy is running the newspaper, the population of Elkhart is growing in big numbers due to the railroad. Many men are coming to work here across the country, from across the country, and even in some instances from across the world, men are being brought here to work on the railroad. Many of them without their families, many of them maybe just single on their own. And that led to the rise in violence, the rise in the establishment of saloons. So that meant more drinking, more bar fights, and more crime. Or, as Emma Malloy reported, more vice going on in the city of Elkhart. So more vice is happening in Elkhart, connected to Emma Malloy's past, which she's married to Edward Malloy at this time, but Edward is her second husband. She was previously married to a man named Lewis Pratt, who suffered from alcoholism. And Emma did one of the things that was very challenging for a woman to do in the 19th century, and that was to obtain a legal divorce. Emma Malloy was able to obtain a legal divorce due to her husband's alcoholism. In fact, in the divorce proceedings, one of the reason why she's granted a divorce, it's listed as habitual drunkenness. So that past, coupled with what's going on with Elkhart, springs Emma Malloy into action, where she starts to write about prohibition of alcohol, the evils of alcohol, and she begins to organize what is known as the Women's Crusade chapter here in Elkhart. The Women's Crusade was a nationwide organization. She started the Elkhart chapter, and they would advocate for people to stop drinking. They would have demonstrations outside of saloons, and they would advocate for tougher laws. They would advocate on the ground level for saloon keepers to close their saloons, and they would later form into the bigger organization known as the Women's Christian Temperance Union. And Emma Malloy became a vital role, at least in the state, starting here in the state organization of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. She became an activist. She became an advocate. She spoke here in the local communities again for temperance. And that also led to her speaking not just about temperance and prohibition of alcohol, but for rights of women. Emma knew how hard it was to get a divorce, so she spoke about the need for the laws to be loosened, especially in situations like hers. She also talked about the biggest thing that women needed, which was seen as radical at the time, was the ability to vote. She was even seen as one of the more radical speakers in her own Women's Christian Temperance Union organization. But she was a very impassioned speaker. She was known for her very effective speaking. So she became more popular and more popular. And only after a few years, her popularity and her speaking across the state led to the ending of the Elkhart Observer, because Emma Malloy decided to pursue this speaking engagements across the state and across the country. And after the newspaper is over, she does so, and she gains nationwide notoriety, even international fame. She goes over to Europe and speaks about the things that were really important to her. And that all started right here in this building in the upper floor where the Elkhart Observer was printed starting in 1872. So our next stop is the intersection of 2nd and High Street. Now, in my opinion, this is the most historic intersection in all of our county, because in every corner of this intersection, there is a significant building or a significant part of history. So it is really the most important historically significant intersection in Elkhart County. So what we're going to do is we're just going to work our way around the intersection here, starting off with the northwest corner, which is home to the Elkhart Municipal Building. So this building was built in 1915. Literally, very little has changed on the outside. This building was built by E. Hill Turnock. There he is again. It's built in a signature style. So if you remember the building, uh, the Waterworks building, the YWCA that I showed you earlier, this is his signature style again. Red brick, limestone accents, horizontal orientation. So this building is also another highlight of E. Hill Turnock. Now, what's important is because this building was going to be home to the city government of Elkhart. Turnock was very precise and very intentional about who worked on this building and the supplies. Like, say, for example, all the steel, all the structural steel on the inside came from the Elkhart Bridge and Iron Company. He hired local plumbers to do all the plumbing. Many other materials were made with local material. So we wanted to make sure, because this was going to be the building of the city of Elkhart, that was built by the city of Elkhart. Now, you notice, if you look at it, there are multiple windows and you can only see two sides of the building. But if we were to turn this building around, it would look the exact same as well, with lots of windows. And there's a very specific reason. So there's so many windows on every floor. And what you can't see is there is a skylight as well that is in the center of the building, which is where the courthouse, or where the courtroom is in this building. There's a huge skylight. And that was not only for style, but it was also for use. Because remember, this building is designed in 1915. So the reason there are windows on every side of the building is to provide sunlight. So no matter what time of day, there was a ability to get light in the room so work can be done. We are still, and being 1915, that was intentional, because we are still only a few years away, but still years away from where indoor electricity was commonplace. So that was intentionally done by E. Hill Turnock to make sure that the workers inside the building had enough light to operate. So as we move from the northwest corner, if we move to the northeast corner of 2nd and High Street, today is a simple parking lot. But also this was home to the first city hall. So the current city hall is across the street, but in the northeast corner of 2nd and High was the first city hall. Now we examined the second city hall earlier in the program, right at the beginning of the program, but this was home to First City Hall beginning in 1875. Now you say to yourself, Elkhart started and was established in the 1830s. Why did it take till 1875 for there to be a city hall? The reason was, during that time period, Elkhart moved from a town to a city, which, when you move from a town to a city, which today those terms are synonymous. Back then, it changed the way your government was structured. Instead of a town hall, there would be a mayor and there would be a city council elected. So the way the city government was structured changed when it went from a town to a city, which necessitated the need for a city hall. It was also home to the fire department, the police department, and the jail. So as you see in this historic photo, at the top of the building, there is a fire bell. And as fire bells when there was an emergency, that bell would ring. Now, the problem with that is that when they built the building, someone did not take into account the size of the bell that they put in the top of the building, and as it rang, it would vibrate. And because of the size of the bell, it would ring. When it would ring, it would vibrate the walls, so much so that on the third floor, which was a meeting rooms, they could not use it at all. And as more and more times they rang the bell, the more and more times the wall would vibrate. It was going to cause significant damage to the point where the entire building would have been unsafe. So that is why 20 years after this building was built in 1895, they moved City Hall to Franklin Street, which we talked about earlier. After 1895, that building was torn down in the early 1900s, and this corner became home to the Carnegie Library. So Andrew Carnegie was a captain of industry during this time and decided to use his wealth to give grants all across the country for the constructions of libraries. So Elkhart got a grant from Carnegie himself in 1903, and designed this library. In fact, Carnegie libraries all across the country kind of look similar in this sense. And this was the at the cost of $35,000 in 1903. This was where Elkhart's library was, and it was the town library, it was the city's library for a number of years until the new library was built, and then this building was torn down in 1970, and it is today a parking lot where people can park to go to the municipal center or go to our next stop, which is at the southwest corner of 2nd and High Street, which is the public library that replaced the library that we were just talking about. So this is the main branch of the Elkhart Public Library. The library has been there since the 1970s, or excuse me, since the 1970s. It is fantastic. It has meeting spaces. It's got rooms for exhibits. It's a great facility that the city has. But prior to the library being there, this was home to the Elkhart First Presbyterian Church. Now, the first church was built in 1872. We don't have a photo of that, but the photo I'm showing you is the building that was built in 1909. Because by the early 1900s, the faith community and the congregation had gotten larger and larger, and they outgrew the space that they had in the original church. So they tore it down and they rebuilt it. Now, this building was built and designed by, guess who? E. Hill Turnock. And it's a fantastic building if you look at it. It has a mixture of some federal architecture, some Gothic revival, some Greek influences as well. It was a magnificent building when it was built. So it was built in 1909. By the 1950s, once again, the congregation had outgrown the size of this building. So the congregation had a decision to make. Were they going to revamp and refurbish this building, or were they going to build a completely new church? It took them a number of years to debate and talk about the problem, and what they decided to do was to build and they built a new church in a different location instead of renovating the church. The new church, which is today along Beardsley Avenue in Elkhart, was completed in 1960. And then when the library was proposed to move to this location, this building was torn down to make way for the current library. And the library that we see today, its construction is the construction we see today. So it hasn't changed much on the outside. So we've seen a home of local government with the library, a home of knowledge. Here in this corner, a home of faith. And then in the last corner, which would be southwest corner, is today a parking lot for the courts building. This was once home to the Center of Education in two different ways. So first off, in 1868, this was home to the Central School, which was Elkhart's first preeminent education building. Instead of one-room schoolhouses that were being used at the time, Central School was the first building that brought multiple grades together into a school building that operated the way a school building would work in modern day, where there's different grades and different classrooms. And the original building was built in 1868. It was a 4-story building, and it cost Elkhart $45,000 to make. And that was not without protests from people of the community. They thought the cost was too high. They thought the population of Elkhart would never get big enough to have the students that would fill this building, and lots of other reasons they would protest. But that was in 1868. By 1884, so we're only talking 16 years later, the population of Elkhart was so large that they had to put an addition on. And in this photo here, you can see the addition behind the original building. The addition was built in 1884. It was an 8-room building. And the way the whole school operated is the first floor was the high school. The second floor held the elementary grades. There was a library, there was a museum, and then there was an office for the school superintendent. So that was in 1884. The building continued to be used as a school. And then as the community got bigger and bigger, another new building was needed to serve the students of the community. So in 1911, the new Elkhart High School was built on this location. Uh, and if you look at it, it resembles the signature style of architect E. Hill Turnock, who designed this building. So once again, you see the red and brown brick, and you see the limestone accents and the horizontal orientation. So it looks like it's a long building, and this is premier signature Turnock. So Elkhart High School opened here in 1911. Some significant things that happened to the building over the time. In 1930, a vocational annex was established for things like shop class and economics, home economics classes, and that today is the only part of the building that's still standing. In 1966, at a different location, a new high school was built, which was known as Elkhart Central. And it was very apparent when Elkhart Central opened and students started going there, and students were still going to this school as well, that this building, built over 50 years earlier, the facility wouldn't be able to keep up, and the facility needed repairs that the school district was not willing to do on a building so old. So in 1972, they built a whole new school, which was known as Elkhart Memorial. And shortly after, this building was torn down. And today, now there's a parking lot for the courts building that is that is nearby. And you can also use the parking lot for the library or the municipal building as well. So there you have it. That is a short recap of the most historic intersection of the entire county, 2nd and High Street. So we have the municipal building, the library, a church, and a high school. So it's a great intersection, and just imagine the stories that and events that have taken place there over the many decades. So as we move on from 2nd and High Street, we just moved south to what is today a nondescript office building, but it was home to one of the most internationally well-known companies that called Elkhart home. And what I'm referring to is the Dr. Miles Medical Company. So the building that was this headquarters was built in 1891 at the southeast corner of Franklin and 2nd Streets. And this building itself held medical production areas, offices, and printing and packaging departments for the Miles Company. So the Miles Company was started in the 1880s by Dr. Franklin Miles, and his invention of nervine, which he invented in his kitchen, in his home, and then later would build it out to a number of different products and go to and grow into a very well-known company here in the United States at this time, and would obviously later become internationally known. So some interesting things that happened in this building. First, in 1902, Dr. Miles, who was president of the company, but not very involved because he had his own specific medical practice that he was running at the time, but he was still president of the company. He built a weather station on top of this building, and that led to the creation of the Miles U.S. Weather Almanac and Handbook of Valuable Information. So they would study the weather, produce an almanac that would predict what was going on in the upcoming year. And it was part information, but it was also part advertisement. So as you flip through the pages, you would see advertisements for the Miles Company on many, many pages. And it became extremely popular right from its first publication. So much so that its first publication produced 6.5 million copies that were spread across the United States. So much so that it became culturally significant that it was mentioned in John Steinbeck's famous novel, Grapes of Wrath. For the Miles Medical Company, the other very important thing that happened here is the creation of an extremely well-known popular medicine, Alka-Seltzer, was developed in this building. So some background information about the story of Alka-Seltzer. During the late 1920s, early 1930s, there was a seasonal flu epidemic that was sweeping across the United States. And the chemists at Miles noticed that there was one group of people in the city of Elkhart that weren't getting sick. And those were the workers at the Elkhart Truth, the newspaper that is still being printed in Elkhart today. So Miles' medical employees went to the Elkhart Truth newspaper office, figured out what they were doing, and realized the concoction that they made, a homemade medicine that they were using, was causing them not to get sick. So they came back to Miles to report their findings to the company's CEO at the time, Andrew Hub Beardsley, and him and head chemist Maurice Trenier discussed what they could do, and they developed their own medicine, which would become Alka-Seltzer. They developed it. Hub Beardsley, after the medicine was developed, goes on a cruise as part of vacation and takes a bunch of samples with him and passes them out to people on the cruise and reports the findings and comes back and reports that it's a successful medicine, especially when it comes to stomach ailments. And it goes into production and has grown into one of the most famously and certainly most well-known marketed medicines that certainly the United States has ever seen, and even the world. So all that happened in this building right here. Now, this building was torn down in 1971 to make way for the St. Joseph Valley Bank. So what you're looking at this intersection is now a building that doesn't have any real historical significance, but at one time, the building that stood here was home to one of Elkhart's most well-known companies and the place where one of the most well-known and well-marketed medicines was developed. Okay, so this next building is one of my favorites because of the mystery behind it. So this is known as the Knickerbocker and Winchester Mansion here in Elkhart at 2nd and Marion Streets. It's historically significant because it was built in 1906, and it was E. Hill Turnock's very first building he designed for the city of Elkhart. So we've been talking about Turnock a lot throughout this program, and here's the very first building he designed here in the city of Elkhart and really all of Elkhart County. So this house was built for Charles Winchester, who was the president of the First National Bank. Nellie, his daughter, and his son-in-law, William Knickerbocker, moved in shortly after their wedding as well. And here's a picture of a historic photo of the Winchester Mansion. As you can see, it hasn't really changed. And as we move on, you can see there's a picture of the Knickerbockers and the Winchesters. So Nellie Winchester Knickerbocker is the woman in the back seat of the car, and her husband William is next to her, and her parents Charles Winchester and Mrs. Winchester are in the front of the car. Now, some history about the family. In 1937, William passes away. Excuse me, 1917, Charles Winchester passes away. William Knickerbocker assumes the presidency of the bank. So when the father dies, William Knickerbocker, the son-in-law, takes over. In 1937, William dies, and Nellie Knickerbocker is the only one left in the family who was alive. She didn't have any children. Her and William didn't have any children. And afterwards, she falls into a deep, deep depression. She lives at the home for the next decade, and she dies in 1947. She was known at that last decade of her life as a recluse. She rarely left this home. The only time she was seen normally is when she would leave the house to go eat lunch at the Hotel Elkhart. Now, where the mystery and the intrigue starts to come into the story is what is absolutely true is that when William dies in 1937, Nellie buys coffins for both her husband and herself at the same time. And today you could keep a coffin at a storage facility, but she had nowhere to store this coffin apparently. So Nellie Knickerbocker Winchester kept her coffin while she was still alive in the living room of this home. Now, the reasons why are interesting. I've heard, as we've researched here at the museum, we've seen a couple different theories. One is that having no children, her cousins would have been in charge of her estate, and Nellie worried that they would buy her a cheap coffin. But whatever the case, if you visited this home between 1937 and 1947 and you went to talk to Nellie Knickerbocker, you could sit in her living room and see her coffin right there for you. Now, that part we can verify and we know that is true. The part where we start to get into intrigue and mystery is there are some people that say she would be known to sleep in the coffin. Or some people say that when she died in 1947, she was found inside the coffin. We do know that she was not found inside the coffin when she passed in 1947. She was in a chair. But nevertheless, the stories have kind of made their way through our collective memory over time. Now, with those stories, after this was a home, today is currently a business, and a number of businesses have occupied this building. And whether you believe it or not, there are stories that this house is haunted by Nellie Knickerbocker Winchester. We've seen some stories over the years of people talking about things that have happened. For example, things like stacks of papers getting knocked down, gusts of wind while the windows are closed in the building, going through the building. But nothing that would border on dangerous. So people say if this is haunted by Nellie Knickerbocker Winchester, she's a happy ghost. But it's interesting to see, and it's always been known as being haunted, and it's kind of held that mystery and that story for a number of years now. So it's just a really fun story to incorporate in programs like these. And it kind of settles on what you believe. If you believe in hauntings, then this house may be haunted. Other people may be more suspect and say that there can be explanations for everything that went on. But the Knickerbocker Winchester Mansion, E.L. Turnock's first home, and possibly haunted by Nellie Knickerbocker. All right, for our next stop, we are headed south. This is our second location that is outside of the downtown Elkhart area. The first one, as you remember, was the home of where the CG Con factory was. This one today is a recycling center. As you can see here, there's a picture of it. But at one time, this was extremely important, not just in Elkhart, but really across the entire country. Because at one time, this was home in 1871 to the Lakeshore and Michigan Southern Railroad Machine Shop. So a little background, in 1851, the first train railroad comes to Elkhart from White Pigeon, Michigan, which wasn't that far away. Elkhart was extremely important for rail lines because any trains that were moving west before they would go on to the big travel hub of Chicago, they would stop here in Elkhart, Elkhart being about 100 miles away from Chicago. So here, and the reason the machine shop was built here in 1871 is this is where any repairs to a train could be done. There could be crews switched out, trains resupplied, locomotives resupplied to make sure they had the fuel that they needed. And then they would travel the 100 miles into Chicago and then further west to their destination. Now, this machine shop that was built at the time was the largest railroad machine shop in the world. It was 600 feet long by 120 feet wide. There was 4 different wings of this building. There was a carpenter shop, there was a blacksmith, there was a boiler maker, and a foundry. And at any one time, 25 specific engines themselves could be worked on to do anything from simple repairs or to be major complete replacement of parts. And the reason that is important for the city of Elkhart and its history is having something like this, the largest machine shop in the world, and being very important on the rail line, brought to Elkhart hundreds of workers, which would diversify the population at that time. Most of the population of Elkhart were first generation Americans that had moved west from the East Coast, particularly states like New York and New Hampshire and Vermont and the New England area. Now, with the railroad, they were bringing workers and immigrants from places like Ireland, Germany, Sweden, England, Canada, Switzerland, Denmark, Scotland, France are all coming here at the time to work for the railroad. What's also important is that during the 1920s, in its second wave of immigration to diversify the population of this town, railroad work and this machine shop drove the growth of African American population to the city of Elkhart because railroad companies looking for workers looked to the southern part of the United States. And for our story, for Elkhart's history, places like Tennessee and Kentucky, where they were hiring farm hands to come up here to Elkhart to work on the railroad. And that led to the building of the African American population, which is still thriving and growing today in the city of Elkhart. And in fact, the next place we're going to look at is actually connected to that growth of the African American population. So, not too far away from the Lakeshore, Michigan machine shop, which, as I mentioned, was a real builder of Elkhart's African American community in the 1920s. This next location was really the heartbeat of that community. Today, it is an open lot, and you can see there's a shed here, but at one time, this area was home to the Booker T. Washington Center. And the Booker T. Washington Center was a community center specifically created and used by the African American community starting in the 1920s. So it was built in 1921 by members of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and it was a community center from 1921 all the way till the 1960s, or to the late 1950s, excuse me. But its most prominent time was from 1941 to 1956 because of the people who ran the center, and that was Herbert and Ruth Tolson. They provided their vision for the Booker T. Washington Center was to provide care for everyone of every age, what they termed a cradle to grave philosophy in the community. So they provided sports, schooling, healthcare, an event space, a library, and community groups. So really everything for new children and for new parents. They provided what was known as a well baby clinic so that young children could get the health care that they needed. For teenagers, they had softball leagues and boxing and baseball, which were some of the best sports teams in the city of Elkhart at that time. Won a number of championships for school age children. You can see here in this slide. They had preschool services before they would enter the formal education for kids. They provided preschool and kindergarten. They provided a number of other groups, number of groups for teenagers and kids to get them involved in their community, to teach them certain things. One of the things that was always important in terms of sports and teenagers and young adults is that at the Booker T. Washington Center, there was always a basketball game being played, and many times members of the police force in Elkhart were there to play basketball and build a bond with this community as well. So it was really, really important for the community. They rallied around it. It was the heartbeat of the African American community, and it operated until 1950, the late 1950s. After the Tolsons left the Booker T. Washington Center, it kind of fell apart and crumbled, and other facilities were made available, but never anything as strong and connected to this community as the Booker T. Washington Center when it was under the direction of the Tolsons. So much so that the current community center in this community today in this location is actually named the Tolson Center after Herbert and Ruth Tolson. So it is a great tribute to their memory and their vision and what they saw for the community. So this, which is now an empty lot, was home to the heartbeat of Elkhart's African American community. And for our last stop in this program, we head to the northwest corner of Main and Harrison, not too far from the Elkhart Civic Plaza where we began this program. As you can see, its current photo is a parking lot. But at the time, the building historically that used to stand here anchored the southern part of Main Street in Elkhart. So what used to be there was the Buckland Opera House. So the Buckland Opera House, uh, as I referred to earlier in the program, was built by Herbert Buckland, real estate developer, and uh, I guess you can say Elkhart tycoon, for lack of a better term. When this building opened, it was in 1884. It quickly became one of the top theaters in the region. It had 1,200 seats. It was home to many performances from prominent prominent performers at the time, vaudeville musicians. Also, with Elkhart's reputation for band instruments, many of the big bands would also come here as well. John Philip Sousa, who was a very famous American band leader, performed here at the Buckland Opera House many times. So it was a 1,200 seat facility. It was one of the best theaters in not just Elkhart, obviously, but the northern Indiana region. This theater was also connected to another prominent name that we mentioned earlier in the program, and that is Dr. Miles. So in 1904, this building became home to the Dr. Miles Grand Dispensary. So it was headquarters for Dr. Miles' own personal practice, not the Miles Medical Company. Previously, he had his practice in Chicago, and in 1904, he moved back to Elkhart. And from the dispensary, he ran his physician through mail practice, which meant what would happen is if you want to consult with Dr. Miles, you could fill out a form, you would mail it in. His staff would look at it. I highly doubt Dr. Miles looked at many of these forms, but they would look at your symptoms. They would give you a prognosis and also send you some Miles medical company medicine that you could use. And that's how it worked. And it worked. It's the Miles Medical Company was home in the third floor of this building until 1922. So from 1904 to 1922, after which it changes names from the Buckland Opera House to the Buckland Theater and became a movie house. It was one of 4 movie houses in Elkhart at the time. So it ran movies from in here for about 35 years. The last movie was shown in 1956. Afterwards, this building was refurbished, and a number of different things occupied this building. From, say, for example, the second floor, there was a ballet school. The third floor, the Elkhart Symphony Orchestra used it as a rehearsal hall. At one time, there was retail space. The 1,200 theater seats were pulled out and altered to make storefronts. But as time went on, the building fell into disrepair, so much so that there was fear that the roof would collapse. So by 1986, this building was torn down. And today, where this grand theater once stood is now just a parking lot where people can park to walk up and down Main Street in downtown Elkhart. So there you have it. We've looked at 12 different sites all across the city of Elkhart. Here again is all those locations. We've delved a little bit into Elkhart's early history. We've talked about some major people and figures here and communities that has made Elkhart and some major businesses and industries. And the great thing about Elkhart is there's so many topics you can explore just by looking into its history, whether it's funny stories about the city hall, the potential haunting of the Winchester Mansion, to the designs of architect Ehud Hernock, to major companies like CG Con and Dr. Miles, and many others. There are some really great stories uh, connected to the history of Elkhart. And I'm sure as Elkhart continues to live on and grow and evolve, there will be more interesting histories that will be uncovered and be told. So I hope you all enjoyed this historical tour of Elkhart. So, and I hope you learned a little bit about the city. So once again, my name is Patrick McGuire. I'm the Curator of Education at the Elkhart County Historical Museum. I hope you've enjoyed this tour, and thank you very much.